Resident Evil Requiem is actually very playable on just 4GB VRAM, but only if you choose the right settings. I tested every graphics settings in multiple scenarios, including rain, combat, and the demanding Raccoon City area, where many players reported heavy FPS drops. And surprisingly, with the right settings, the game can stay smooth even in those areas, despite running on a RE engine, which is extremely optimized for linear games and using Lenovo protection. Also, if you are using RTX 2000 or 3000 series GPU, you can enable DLSS frame generation using DLS Enabler, which is currently performs better than the in-game FSR frame generation. I will leave the guide for that in the description. Now let's go through every settings and find the best optimized configuration for 4GB VRAM systems. First, let's talk about anti-aliasing. Turning it completely off improves performance slightly, but it introduces noticeable noise and jagged edges, especially in distance objects. Using DLSS gives the best balance between image quality and performance. Compared to TAA, DLSS delivers around 15% higher FPS in most scenarios while maintaining a softer but cleaner image. TAA looks slightly sharper, but the performance cost is higher. So for low VRAM system, DLSS is clearly the better choice. Next is upscaling mode. The options are performance, balanced, quality, DLAA. Each step up slightly reduces performance by around 7 to 8% FPS. However, DLAA is extremely demanding and can drop performance by 55 to 60% compared to the other modes. DLSS performance mode gives around highest FPS but introduces some blur. DLSS quality provides a much cleaner image while still maintaining good performance. So overall, DLSS quality is the safest option for both visual and performance. Next, we have the graphics quality preset. In the range scenario, with multiple NPCs around, low settings delivered around 100 FPS, but switching to normal immediately reduced performance by 35 to 40%. Interestingly, going from high to max only reduced performance by around 2 to 5%, which means the biggest jump happens between low and normal. Inside the building, the difference is smaller. In some indoor areas, the game even reached 120 FPS on maximum settings, showing how much environment complexity affects performance. However, in the demanding Raccoon City area, FPS dropped around 20 to 25% compared to the range scenario. Because of that, using normal settings everywhere is not always safe for 4GB GPUs. So instead of presets, it's better to customize the settings individually. One of the most demanding settings after ray tracing is hair strands. When enabled, FPS dropped from 155 FPS down to around 77 FPS, which is nearly a 50% performance loss. Even though it improves character hair simulation, the visual improvement is not worth such a massive FPS drop. Unless you have a very powerful GPU, it's better to keep hair strands disabled. Next is texture quality, which is another demanding setting. First, comparing low and high settings. Low gave around 150 FPS, while high dropped performance to 110 to 115 FPS. In another scene, comparing low, normal, and high, the result are this. So, each step roughly cost 5 to 10% performance. For 4GB VRAM systems, low is the safest option. Normal can still work smoothly in most areas, but in heavy locations like Raccoon City, limited VRAM might cause stutters. If you experience stuttering, lowering texture quality should be your first adjustment. Till then, keep using normal option. Texture filter quality has 5 levels, but I tested 3. All of them delivered identical performance, but 16x provided slightly sharper texture at oblique angles. So, there is no reason not to use anisotropic 16x. Mesh quality controls geometry complexity of objects in the environment. The visual difference between low and standard is subtle, but standard costs around 5% performance. Sometimes it causes up to 10%, especially in complex areas like Raccoon City. For 4GB VRAM system, low is the safer option. Screen space reflections simulate dynamic reflections using screen data. Enabling it costs around 3 to 5% performance depending on the scene. If you prefer clearer reflections on surface like water or floors, you can keep it enabled. Subsurface scattering affects how light interacts with character skin. There is almost no performance difference between off and low, but high introduces a slight cost. Visually, it makes skin appear softer and more realistic, but it mostly noticeable in close-up scenes. Personally, I kept it off, but this one is mostly preference. Lens distortion simulates camera lens imperfections around skin edges. It does not affect performance, but slightly distorts the image. Since it does not improve gameplay visuals significantly, I kept it off. Particle lighting controls how particles interact with lighting. It mainly affects things like sparks, fire effects, and small environmental particles. Performance impact is negligible, so it's safe to keep on. Volumetric fog affects how fog and light interact in the environment. Moving from lowest to high cost around 5% performance, low provides a good visual balance while maintaining better performance, so low is recommended. Lens that simulates dirt or smudges on the camera lens while looking at bright light sources. It has no measurable performance impact, but it can slightly reduce visual clarity. I personally kept it off, but this is purely preference. Lens flare simulates bright light scattering from strong light sources. Off, standard, and high only differ by about 2% performance. Standard provides a nice visual effect without noticeable FPS loss, so standard is recommended. Shadow quality can vary depending on scene complexity. In some areas, there was almost no FPS difference, but in other, moving from low to max cost around 12% performance. Because shadows can become expensive in large environments, low or normal is recommended. Contact shadows add small shadow details around objects. In my test, enabling or disabling them showed almost no visible performance impact and visual differences are subtle, so it's safe to leave this enabled. Ambient occlusion adds subtle shading in corners and object interactions. Performance remained nearly identical across off, low, normal, and high. However, increasing the setting makes shadow in corner much darker and more pronounced. For a balanced look without overly dark areas, low is recommended. VFX quality controls visual effects like blood splatter, explosions, and particle effects during combat. Standard provides richer visual effects but can reduce FPS by 5 to 10% during intense combat scenes. To maintain smoother performance, low is recommended. With these settings, the game stays smooth even in demanding areas while still maintaining solid visual quality.